Hi everyone, I'm Suma and I'm here with Nélson Abreu. He's an electrical engineer and an instructor at IAC, International Academy of Consciousness, and he's also a member of ICRL, International Consciousness Research Labs.
Hi,
Welcome, Nélson.
thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming here and taking this time to join us.
My pleasure.
Can we first start by how you began working at IAC and what motivated you to join IAC?
I was just in high school. I had my first experience reading about this area. A friend of mine from Brazil gave me a book. It was about out-of-body experiences, and it also talked about other topics like bioenergy or chi. And I was just curious, is this something you can really experience for yourself? Because one thing was to believe that there might be more than what the eye can see, maybe more than the body and the brain can normally perceive. Maybe it's just something you can read about, right, in religious books or in philosophical books. And this idea that you can have your own experiences really intrigued me. So for me, it was not any different than, for example, dreaming of being an astronaut. So you could see what it's really like to look at the Earth from outer space and maybe even visit other worlds, right? So this was a much cheaper way of accomplishing that, right? No plane ticket necessary, no rocket ship. Just basically learn a few techniques and see what happens. Now, I did just that. I tried to have my first experiences, and at first, I have to confess, I was scared because you hear about things like, what if you cannot come back from an out-of-body experience? What if somebody snatches your body? And, all these kind of fears that you have from Hollywood, religious kind of upbringing, etc., etc. However, I think my curiosity, my excitement about learning what was out there was just bigger than those fears. It did prevent me from having some experiences. So I felt, for example, vibrations coming on throughout my body. I felt like there was a pressure building up and that I'm about to go. But then at the last minute, that just felt too overwhelming and I would tense up and then the experience would go away. But eventually I overcame those fears and I had my first experience. And truly, it was different than just reading about it. When you have that visceral first-person perspective, you realize that there might be really something beyond the body, beyond the brain, that you are first and foremost a being, consciousness, if you will, and that that comes before being human, man, brown skin, whatever, So it brings you closer to the essence of life. I felt a connection with the universe, with the plants, with animals, with all other beings, and I felt that identity really as a consciousness first, and that changed everything for me. At first, it was just a scientific curiosity, but really, from that moment on, I realized that it can have a transformative effect, because once you change the level of being or consciousness, you change everything else. So I realized that this is an important topic because people who have their own experiences can transform their behaviors, attitudes, values, and they can have a more purpose-filled life and a life with less fear. I'm not saying I'm looking forward to death because I love what I'm doing on Earth, right? But I'm no longer afraid of what comes after because I feel like I've had a pretty good preview and it's not so bad at all, and that life is a continual journey in different forms. So being free of that fear gives me courage to do things that are different, to go against the grain, to try to make a difference, to fail and try again. And that's very liberating.
What was your first out-of-body experience like?
It wasn't extraordinary other than the fact that I felt like I finally am out. Finally. It's just this feeling of gratitude and achievement. But I knew by then I could not get too excited because I'll come right back. Right? So I contained that feeling, but definitely it was a feeling of satisfaction, of accomplishment. but I knew I had to try to stay calm. And really, it was just about looking around my room and then going to the living room and crossing the wall and feeling like, okay, I'm in my living room and the curtains were parted so I could see outside and I saw the trees. And one thing that I'll never forget is that I think by then I should have been wearing prescription glasses like I'm wearing right now. But at that time I wasn't. So I just remember being in class in school, trying to find out what the teacher wrote on the board and sitting closer and closer to the board and refusing to go and get eyeglasses or not realizing I needed them. Well, in that experience, everything was so sharp all of a sudden. I said, wow, a tree has leaves and it's not just this green blur, I could see in like ultra definition everything. And every object, living or not, seemed to have like energy of its own, a brilliance, a light. And I was just so fascinated. I thought I could almost notice like chakras or something, like energy centers on the tree. And I was very curious and I wanted to go and see. But the excitement of it all eventually caught up with me. And then it turned more into like a dreamlike sequence of events. So I went from having heightened state of awareness to a lower state of awareness, almost like a lucid dream. And eventually degraded into a normal dream because I don't even remember how it ended. So that was my first foray into the out-of-body experience. I did have things that you could call partial OBEs right away, like without too much effort, just trying every night. I started having, for example, feel like one arm came out of the body. And for me, that's fascinating that you can feel that your body is asleep and you can have some kind of awareness about that fact. And at the same time that you feel the body is very real, but numb, you feel this other aspect that's also feeling equally real, but maybe more subtle. And the fact that you can feel both bodies at the same time and they both feel real to you, somehow that made it click for me as well that, okay, this doesn't feel like just a dream. It feels like it's more than a dream. And of course, even when I had my first full-blown out-of-body experience, it did take me about 5 months. The fact that I've had many of these like mini OBEs, partial OBEs, false starts, and then one full one, it gave me a certain idea, which is for the person that doesn't have OBEs with lucidity, out-of-body experience, or projection of the consciousness with awareness, what I'm saying sounds a little bit far-fetched maybe, or how do you know if it's not a dream? But the person that has the experience with awareness, to question that experience feels more like questioning this moment right now. I had the same or even more level of awareness, at least for a certain period of time. And during that moment, it never passed my mind that was not a real thing. Now, of course, as an engineer, science-leaning, I was not satisfied with that. I wanted to have an experience where I obtained some kind of evidence that what I was seeing was real. But really, the experience was self-evident. And I think that was interesting. And I could relate to people who have near-death experiences, and it felt real. Now I can understand after having had many experiences. But it wasn't until I had my first kind of veridical experience, something that I could confirm, that then I was really satisfied that, okay, there's no way this is just in my head.
It's like a real memory.
It's something that I could, it felt like it was real in my mind, just like I might remember what I did yesterday, some meetings or something. But I could also call up, for example, the people that I met yesterday and say, please describe some details of our encounter. And I could write my own and we could compare them. Would they be exactly the same? Probably not. But there would be enough corroboration of facts. They would say, okay, yeah, this really happened. I just didn't dream that I went to work and had a meeting or something, right? But the same way, I could have an out-of-body experience. I could write down what I observed or who I met, which is so interesting, right? You can meet someone else outside the body. And then provided that both people remember, or provided that what you saw can be confirmed, you can compare the facts, and then you can see, okay, how could I have known this? Is there any other way I could have known it other than having been there? And if you have enough of these corroborated, verified experiences, then really there's no doubt in your mind that you had that experience. Now, I don't expect someone else to believe that, right? It would be unreasonable for me to expect that. But that just brings up that point that there's really no replacement for people having their own experience. That's where the transformation, that's where the real evidence will come. No amount of scientific evidence will satisfy that requirement. And so I dedicated myself to volunteer for organizations like IAC, ICRL, since I was in high school, starting my own high school club, university club. I helped to start a university class with a professor at University of Florida, Dr. Barbara Welsh. And she taught that course for a few years. And so I went from maybe now about 20 years of giving lectures and courses. Now, as an engineer, I think it was inevitable. My topic or my focus is transitioning to application. Right? How do you bring these lofty ideas and almost esoteric experiences, at least for the person that doesn't have them, to the real world, the everyday practical world? And I'm realizing that people are receptive to this idea that energy, out-of-body experiences, first of all, are not weird. It's just part of the natural spectrum of experience. Psychology accepts out-of-body experiences as a normal altered state. Neuroscientists accept it as a healthy state. And it is actually one that can reduce your perception of pain. If you see Dr. Olaf Blank in Switzerland, he's studying this aspect. It is also something that might boost your insight. So people have lucid dreams, out-of-body experiences. Scientifically, they've been shown to have more insight or creative problem solving, which is one of my areas of interest and expertise, right, as an engineer and someone studying innovation. And in addition to that, it is also known that all mindfulness practices can help in some way, shape, or form, right, with either boosting your vitality, your creativity, but importantly, managing things like stress, depression, anxiety, which have, especially stress is known to have a huge impact on inflammation and many illnesses and so on. So I'm interested also in exploring these applications that can help everyday people. But I am still teaching with IAC and collaborating with ICRL to go deeper than that, right? And find out how do these phenomena work and how can we facilitate them more and more, and creating community, right? And but for the more applied part, the more practical applications, I'm working with Numascape. It's a company that's going to have a basically a startup phase that will work on bringing these applications and turn them into beautifully designed technologies that people can use in their everyday life.
At ISC, when you facilitate people to have out-of-body experiences,
Yes.
How often is it someone does successfully?
It's hard to say because we're not necessarily surveying them, so I don't have like a precise number. But my observation has been that a lot of people, like for example, when I first took it, I took the consciousness development program. It's this 40-hour training program. It has practical components and theoretical components. During this experience, I had maybe like a partial OBE, very brief thing. Like it was my legs came out and came back right away. So nothing super remarkable. But what I did is I took all the techniques I learned and I kept practicing. I took some follow-up workshops, and then at some moment of continuing to work with especially the energy techniques I learned, how to install the so-called vibrational state, then once I was able to develop a practice with energy and with OBEs together, then I went from having an OBE once a year or something like that to, for example, I had 3 over a period of 2 days. And okay, then I had to struggle a little bit more, but then I started to shrink the period between OBs from every few months to every month to every few weeks to basically weekly and then multiple times a week. So it was a progressive type of thing. So it's difficult for an organization like IAC to say, okay, you take this course, I guarantee you'll have the OB. You can't, because it's really up to the student. Two things. One is, what kind of practice discipline do you have, right? So for me, I knew I had to try the OB at least a couple of times a week. I had to have a certain regimen, like training for anything else, right? Ideally daily, but maybe your lifestyle doesn't allow that, but at least some sort of consistent practice. If you just try here and there, you have to be very prone to succeed. Most people are not that predisposed, so they have to try, with some kind of regularity. And then the second thing is, how predisposed are you? So how often do you try, and how predisposed are you? In my case, I was not that predisposed, but I was very persistent. So that meant that I was able to succeed. But I do see other students that in the first class, they lie down, they try the OBE. We just spoke about the OBE. I give them a very simple technique at first, because they get more and more progressively interesting. And they had an OBE. And they felt, oh, my head went through the ceiling, I did this and that. I said, wow, first try. So that was because that person was very predisposed overall in that day. And then the act of talking about it, learning a simple technique, that's all it took. In other cases, people have an OB after a few weeks during the course, but it's not uncommon for people to have to keep trying and applying the techniques to have the experience. Because imagine, it's like having high cholesterol and your veins are full of cholesterol, blood doesn't flow well. Mm-hmm. You can have the best diet and exercise plan on earth. You're not going to become healthy overnight and achieve a higher state of health, right? You'll have to reduce that cholesterol so then for the blood to flow better to the veins, right? I think for us, a little bit like that, like our energy pathways are a little blocked and from lack of use, let alone awareness, right? And we start to become aware that we have energy. We start to use the energy, move it through the body, kind of clogging those pipes and cleaning the cobwebs. And now our system is roaring at a much better level. And now we can do things like out-of-body experience and even other psychic abilities a lot easier, just because we improve the overall level of health of our energy system. So that was a key thing I learned at IAC that I'm trying to transmit through IAC, is that all these different phenomena are interconnected. Psychic abilities like telepathy, or out-of-body experience, intuition, right? And the energy practices like Tai Chi, Qigong, and so on, they appear to be separate things, but they're all interconnected. And IAC has done a good job of attempting to study them as an integrated system. And the idea is something that I know from practice. When I had my first out-of-body experience, or even just partial OBs, I started to have other phenomena happen to me, like premonitions, telepathy, a lot more, right? And then once I started working with energy, I started having more OBEs and more psychic abilities. So it's like a positive snowball. One thing is interrelated to the other. So you unblock this aspect, and then it helps this one. When you help this one, it helps this one. So this is something that I think people will notice and benefit from. Work with this energetic aspect. Learn how to send energies, absorb energies, how to activate energy within your own body. And then you also notice better results in out-of-body experience. Work on out-of-body experience, you see better results in the energy. Yeah.
What are the different types of out-of-body experiences?
There are many in terms of what you could do in the out-of-body experience. So, for example, one thing that I experience in workshops, IAC workshops, but even just on my own, in my own house, for example, is that it is possible to have a contact with a non-physical physical entity, right? So in this case, people might call it like ascended masters or angels or guides, mentors, spirit guides, and so on, right? Extra physical helpers. There's all these different names. But for me, my experience, and basically that's the perspective that IAC teaches, is that these beings are no different than us. It's not like they're cut from a different cloth, some kind of divine substance or something. They are consciousness, they are beings just like us, but maybe more developed, right? More mature, more evolved. And what that means is that they can act as role models, mentors for us. But the ones that I feel are really authentically more advanced than us, they don't actually come to us to tell us what to do. I've never had one of these beings come and tell me, you have to change this, you have to do this, or believe this or believe that. So they're not pushy, right? But being in their presence means that you feel their energy, you feel the content of their energy, more than their appearance or anything like that. It's their essence. You can tap into that and feel a little bit what they feel. So when you're in the presence of these beings, you feel like your intellect is heightened, your understanding of the world heightens, your feeling of fraternity for all living things is greater, and your feeling of purpose or duty or the feeling of service or altruism is also heightened. So essentially, just by being in their presence, you want to be more like them. But they don't tell you how, necessarily, or not usually. They might facilitate certain things, like certain insights and understanding, by showing you things about, potentially about your past lives, but really mostly showing you things that you can see outside the body, like people who are not necessarily in a good condition, who are suffering and that need some kind of intervention. And you can participate in some of those too, whether it's energy or counseling, right? It's really the greatest privilege, I think, of the out-of-body experience is to be in the presence of someone more evolved than you who is basically serving mankind in some way. And of course, you're only playing a small role in that, but even that is very gratifying, and you can learn a lot from that. So I think that's an interesting kind of experience, the altruistic experience, if you will, and the learning experience. But there's other kinds which are more leisure-like. Like I've had experiences where I just feel like I go for a flight. And it's just the feeling of being free like a bird. And it's a beautiful feeling, right? Or just seeing something new, traveling, essentially, without a passport, without a visa, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes on Earth, but sometimes it feels like you are in different planes of reality. And sometimes you see something that inspires you here on Earth to tackle a problem, to just see the world a different way, or just to understand life in a deeper manner, right? But there's just curiosities about the out-of-body experience. For example, one of my friends in university, he had sleep paralysis very frequently, and the topic came up about what I'm interested in, and he said, I have this experience where I feel like my body just locks up. I can't open my eyes. I can't speak when I get up, and I panic, right? And he said the first time he felt it, he thought he was going to die or was dying. But of course, he's had this now dozens of times, so he knows he'll be okay, but he just feels uncomfortable, right? And he didn't know what he could do with it. So I told him, why don't you stop struggling with it and just let it go, just see what happens. That's all I told him. And he did that the next time it happened, a couple of weeks later, and he had an out-of-body experience, right? And what he remembers the most about that OBE were two things. One was that he could see through his closet into the clothes that were hanging on the closet. And then he could go deeper and deeper, zooming in into the fabric. So it's almost like you have this microscopic vision, and then everything was so sharp. Even he remembers how his shoelaces were, laid out on the floor, on his sneakers and the shoelaces, the way they were just splashed on the floor. Then he turned the corner and he noticed that his body went through part of the door frame. And that was interesting. And then he saw another one of our roommates making a sandwich, cutting something in a particular part of the kitchen. And then he came back and he looked, and his shoes were laid out exactly the same way, and our roommate was cooking, and that whole idea for him was very powerful, that he could have almost like new senses, right? And you can zoom in, you can see through walls, you can see at a distance, seeing in 360 degrees at the same time, which is extraordinary. And also perceiving things that our brain can't even make sense of it. A sound you cannot even hear with your natural hearing spectrum. A color that doesn't make sense to us with our physical eyes. So having all these novel experiences and senses, you get the idea that the physical body is almost like a rudimentary copy of that other body that can only do a fraction of what that body can do. And it's really fascinating just to explore that aspect. The things, the senses, or the kind of perception you can have beyond just the brain, our seven senses. So
It's kind of like a personal proof that this may be a virtual reality.
yes, since I was in high school, I've been trying to think about these phenomena and how you might be able to have a framework to understand them, right? And to this day, the first thing I thought about when I was reading about out-of-body experiences and telepathy was, how can I be here and have access to information that's way over there? Well, maybe it's not way over there. Maybe that's just a illusion. So exactly, I started thinking about a video game character, right, or virtual reality character that believes that it's walking through an environment and going from here to there. And in reality, it's just information, right? Zeros and ones encoded in a computer. So basically, the information is not far away or close by. And it just appears to be that way, right? So when you go to a website and you click a link and you go to a page, you're not going anywhere, right? Everything is just stored in the cloud. It's just the way it's represented to us. So why couldn't this world be the same way, right? We are operating through this body, and there's a certain representation. But when we go to another dimension, we might not be going anywhere. It's just we are using a different avatar, right? And we're using a different filter and parsing through the information in a different way. And ultimately, people who have this very advanced kind of out-of-body experience, they feel like they don't even have a normal body. Like, it's not that they don't have a physical body or even an astral body. Now it feels like they have no body at all. When you have an out-of-body experience, it can feel like you are exploring reality, but now you're parsing information just using a different set of rules, right? And that you are just in a different virtual reality that has different rules, right? Or like a different level in a game that just has different gameplay rules. And your little avatar can do things that the other one couldn't, but essentially feel the same. I'm the same consciousness. And if you are accessing information at a distance, maybe that distance is an illusion, right? Maybe we are all just connected in the cloud. Except this cloud, in this case, is just a way of experiencing reality more directly, without some kind of mediation, filtering, distortion. And we can see people who have experiences that are of a more cosmic nature, people who have experiences of oneness with reality, of feeling just at one with everything and everyone. They usually feel like they have a very advanced out-of-body experience where they don't even feel like they have a normal three-dimensional body. So they go beyond the physical body, the energetic aspect or body, if you will. They go even beyond the astral body that can go through walls and whatnot. They are now feeling they have no body and that they are nowhere. They're beyond space and time as we understand it. And it's more of an experience of oneness, of connection with all knowledge, with all beings. And it's more based on understanding and ethics and insight. So these experiences indicate, right, there are not that many data points for that, but they indicate that ultimately, yes, probably everything around us, even our bodies, are just like technological extensions of the essence of being or consciousness. And we can say that in the sense that is like an information model rather than like an energy model to describe the universe, right? Now, proving that is very difficult, but I find that it's at least a useful concept. Now, I wouldn't say that everything in the universe, including consciousness, is just data, like zeros and ones, because we animate this world, right? We have things like an inner sense of our life, the feeling of being us. And I'm not aware of a computer that has a feeling of being itself, right? So even a very advanced artificial intelligence might give us the impression that it does because it's so good at mimicking the real living being. But it doesn't mean it is a consciousness, right? So I think we might find that we are not going to just be able to artificially create a consciousness. But maybe we'll create a body that is sufficiently biological, a mixture of technology and biology, that might be able to host consciousness. And of course, that will raise all kinds of ethical and technological, philosophical, legal issues. So it's worth thinking about before it happens, if it ever happens.
Thanks for explaining that in detail about out-of-body experiences and virtual reality. I think that's a good framework to think about. And going back to what you mentioned about non-physical beings, how do you tell a difference when you are having an out-of-body experience?
Yes.
How do you tell the difference between if someone is non-physical or it's like another human?
Well, if you're having an out-of-body experience, first it's important to realize that not all experiences are happening like in this realm, or not all the experiences are even related to this realm. So I have had experiences where I cannot say like I'm in Los Angeles, I'm on Earth, or even a different planet. It's almost like you are just in a different channel altogether, a different realm. And there's no analog really to the physical Earth. So you wouldn't just meet anybody from Earth unless they were also projected in that environment. And it might be difficult to tell them apart because unless their silver cord is visible, which usually there's no visible connection, right? Then you might have a hard time unless you recognize them from Earth. Say, hey, you're that friend, or you're that person I've met at a conference or something. So you might get a clue in that way. But if you're having an experience in the equivalent Los Angeles, let's say, right? So you go outside the body and you'll feel like you are able to see our beautiful packed highways, and you see, oh, there's the traffic jam. And then you go to, for example, your favorite cafe. You go there and you see the people who are sitting, and you will notice that some people are going about their daily business, drinking their coffee or whatever. And you might notice that there's other people who are unable to really interact with the physical people, who are maybe not even aware that they're dead, but they're sort of roaming around. And they might notice you. So you notice that no other being notices that you're there because you are technically in a different dimension, so to speak, a different reality. But you're almost able to sort of like look down and see what's going on. So you see people walking in and out, working on their computers, and they're completely oblivious to you. Nobody notices you. But then there's this other person that no one notices them either, but they can see you. Well, that's a pretty good hint that that person is not from the physical realm, right? They are inhabiting, so to speak, that space. There's a chance they could be just a visitor like you, temporarily projected, or they're just more or less permanently there, right? At least for some amount of time. Now, what I've noticed is that beings that tend to hang around the familiar spaces and environments, they're somewhat stuck, most likely. Because think about it. There's this whole spectrum of realities outside the body. Why would you choose to hang out all the time here, going through the motions, the same motions. Probably because you're not even very aware that that's what you're doing. You're just sort of conditioned to go home, go to work, go to a coffee shop, whatever you used to do, because you're not very aware. And so I've had the opportunity to interact with some of these beings and kind of provide them direction, awareness, to help them kind of move on. But sometimes it's difficult because they're really not aware. And all you can do is maybe send them energy, send them like a good intention, a good sort of transmit calm, transmit a sort of understanding towards them. And then maybe over time they can develop more awareness, right? And you can act as a sort of intermediary between beings with less awareness and beings with more awareness, because you're in this kind of privileged situation. You're able to be at a level where you can be seen by these less aware beings, but you are sufficiently aware to connect with the inspirations of more advanced beings, who are more subtle and are hard to see even sometimes. So you're sort of like in between, and that gives you that ability to help.
But appearance-wise, they don't look any different.
They might look different. They might look kind of the same. Sometimes, depending on how bad they feel inside, it might even start to change their appearance. Like if they're in a very confused state, they might even have a difficulty maintaining their appearance. It might look a little distorted even, which can be unsettling if you're not used to that. But really, there's nothing to be afraid of, and I think that's something important to say, that there isn't something like a pure evil, demons and things like that are out to get you or something of that sort. I think that's something that was invented to keep people away from having their own experiences. It's a lot easier to manipulate, it's a lot easier to deceive someone if they're afraid. But if they are able to overcome their fears, have their own experiences, might they see something unsettling here and there? Sure. I see something unsettling just driving through LA, so it's normal. But hey, I'm okay, here I am, right? Actually, I think being in a major city is a lot more hazardous to your health and well-being than just going to an out-of-body experience. But just like you might see something that was sad or unsettling, you might also see things that are truly astoundingly beautiful. Hear an amazing kind of music that you cannot hear here. Have an experience with a very kind and evolved being that gives you a lot of insight. So you can have a spectrum of experiences. And that's just something that as a mature person or a person in process of becoming more mature, you learn to accept that, okay, that life has good things in it, bad things in it, but you don't have to be afraid of them. Right? The major thing I learned about out-of-body experience is that I'm immortal. My body is not immortal, it's very much fragile, and it has a limited lifetime. But me as a consciousness or as a being, I'm immortal and indestructible. That doesn't make me more powerful than anyone else, because they are also immortal and indestructible. It just helps me think about the fact that I will be around for a long time, probably for eternity, right? So some things that used to bother me maybe don't have to bother me so much. But it's ironic. Like you could say, well, if I'm immortal, then what's the rush? Like, okay, so maybe you don't have to be too harsh on yourself. But also, it is true that even though we might be forever, the opportunities, the conditions that we have right now aren't. So, for example, you might have right now the opportunity to talk to someone and forgive them or seek forgiveness, basically reconciliation. That condition is not going to be there forever, right? So don't wait on those types of things, right? You have the ability to help someone because you have access to them. Yeah, don't postpone that too long. Do your part. Do what you can, right? You can learn from someone. Go ahead, learn from them. But in general terms, yes, we're immortal. But we have basically something that you get out of out of these experiences, which is a sense of a sense of urgency about your life purpose. So I've had experiences where I felt like I went to an environment where I felt like I belonged there. It's like you have an extra physical or astral home, right? And you feel at home. It's like, okay, I feel like I belong here. I feel good here. I feel like the other people here share values with me, share priorities with me. I recognize some of them in a way. I don't know where I know them from, but they just feel familiar. And what I notice is the people in this environment, that they have a sense of coming to Earth and trying to, of course, learn, but also give something back to help advance a cause, to improve the condition of communities and really all of mankind, to develop knowledge. And that's where I felt the most at home. And I found this like a filing cabinet, essentially. Of course, it's not really a filing cabinet. This is the way I perceived it. And I found a file, which had, not my name, but it felt like this is my file. And I looked through it. It basically gave me an idea that before I was born, that I had preparation, that I had almost like simulations and classes and discussions with other people who have similar values and priorities, and that I was mentored by beings that were even more advanced than me or more experienced, and that all of that was for a reason, that I was to come here and then do my part. So even though I might live forever, I know that mission is for now, and I don't have forever to execute it. So it gives me a sense of purpose, of agency, but also of relative urgency, that I don't want to waste this life and not do my part, right? So that doesn't make me feel bad, but it does make me feel like, okay, I should seek to use my time, my energy as wisely as possible. But not to the point that I also don't stop to smell the roses, so to speak, right? And enjoy this life also. It's not about feeling guilty or stressed out, right? So there has to be a balanced perspective, balanced life. But so I've been able to overcome my fear of death, but also I've acquired a greater love of life, if that makes sense.
It has increased the quality of your experience.
Absolutely. So replacing fear-based living with more like purpose living and a love-based living. Love just not in the cheesy way, right? But really in all its aspects, like friendship, relationships, relationship with my wife too, but also like with all mankind, right? Like feeling like my life can have a good impact on others, and being receptive to the impact that other people can have on my life. And that is something that seems unrelated to out-of-body experiences, but it isn't, because the closer you are to your own essence, then you realize, what are we? What is consciousness? It's very hard to define, but the closest thing I can come up with is like we are living agents, right? That are interconnected and are in constant evolution. So the more connected with your own sense that you are, then the more you're going to want to be interconnected and have good interconnections with others. And you want to evolve and help others evolve. So now that could mean many things. That's where each one of us will act on that in our own way, right? Because we have different backgrounds, different interests, different relationships. But I think it's kind of a general thing. We're all here to learn and evolve, to develop, become more mature, become kinder, more complex in a good way, more intelligent. But we also want to develop better relationships with everyone. Because we see when we are on Earth now and we have access to all the information in the world, it's hard to remain neutral and just watch the world, burn. Also, you can become very pessimistic and just sort of cynical because you are more aware of what's going on in the world. and you might not realize that many things are getting better, right? So rather than just being cynical and just jaded and disconnected from the world and give up on the world, maybe we can see, okay, what can I do? What small part can I play? And I think that's a healthier way to live in today's world. And if you think about the big picture, yes, there are many problems, but the future is an evolution. Even if we take a few steps back, the long-term future is towards a better place, right? So we might as well just carve at the mountain little by little so that we can get rid of all these different problems. I think one thing I've learned is that at the base of a lot of the problems that we face, whether it's environmental disasters, right, climate change, or economic injustice, social inequality, even things like problems in economics in general, macroeconomics, those things seem totally unrelated to out-of-body experience, right? Like, what does the GDP have to do with out-of-body experience? But if you look at GDP and other economic indicators, you will find that it has to do with flows of information, and what people and how people want to act on that information, right? There's power plays going on, right? Relationships, and you go deeper and deeper, you find values, attitudes, behaviors. Because money as a store of value means that do you invest in trees because you find that trees are very valuable? Or do you invest in an app because it's going to have a lot of ad revenue? I mean, it just what you invest in, what you buy, just depends on what you value, right? But what you value is not a tangible thing. Money is really not a real tangible thing. It's just a store of a very subjective thing, which is what you value. And what you value comes from your consciousness. So if you change your consciousness, if you help change social consciousness little by little, you will change all of that, all those layers of the economics. And yeah, it will have an impact eventually, maybe in 20 years, on the GDP, on the interest rates and all of that. So basically, the same thing with the ecology. If you feel like this is just your only life and there will be no consequence to your actions, then maybe you don't feel like recycling and or reducing even your consumption is important, right? Let's pollute as much as we want because, who cares? I won't be around. But if you think that there's a chance that you might come back and you have to deal with the consequences of this generation, right? Then you might, okay, maybe I don't want a world that's really bad, right? Even if you have no kids and you think, doesn't matter, this is a one-way ticket, then once you have a preview of, okay, maybe I will come back. Maybe my actions have a reaction, sort of like karmic reaction, right? That everything I think, everything I do puts out something into the world that then affects what's going to happen back to me later on. Then you'll be a little more cautious. Also, if you just think of yourself rather than an individual in a competitive universe, and you think of yourself as a member of an ecological whole, then you realize that we are really in a web, right? What I do affects you, what you do affects me. So then when I help myself, I'm actually, to some extent, helping you. But also when I help you, I am, to an extent, helping myself. So the more you can think in this win-win perspective, collaborative, cooperative perspective, then you realize even nature is that way. People focus a lot on the survival of the fittest. But really, humans are not the fastest on Earth. We are, not the strongest animal on Earth. What we are really good at is cooperating, creating systems, creating laws, creating, cities, right? And agreements, which allows us together to be strongest and smartest and everything else, right? And people lose sight of that. They think that we are just alone in the world. If you're alone in the world, there is no internet, for example. The internet is based on agreements, and some of them are not even profit-driven, right? There would be no patent system. That probably it'd be difficult for a lot of inventions, to go out into the world. Although I suppose that's debatable, right? But basically, without laws, without systems, it would be very hard to have an organized life, right? If nobody respected traffic laws or any law, it'd be hard to get things done. So we are here to work together, right? And I think these experiences, with out-of-body experience, with energy, reveal just how interconnected we are, and then will motivate us to work together even better.
That's a great explanation. So as your awareness starts expanding, your value system starts changing.
Exactly, and then it changes everything. Relationships, and even the way a company might work, the way a government might work, etc.
In your book, you have explained different types of bodies, like energy body, astral body, and causal body. If you can elaborate more on that, what they mean.
So this is an idea that comes from the ancients, right? In the library in university, I ran into a book on the Vedas, right? And this ancient Indian philosophy and science. And they spoke about 4 vehicles. Now, they had different names for them. They called them shells or kosas, right? But in IAC, I learned about, for example, the somas, which is just a European-based root for the same thing, vehicles or bodies, right? So like the soma being the physical body, the energosoma being the energy body, the psychosoma being like the astral body, and the mental soma being the mental body. But it's basically the same idea. If you look at theosophy literature, it's very similar. They have different bodies, right? And so on. So this idea is not new, the idea that we have various vehicles of manifestation. And they go into that a lot in the consciousness development program at IEC. But for me, it basically means that it's just a model for describing that we can have different experiences. So when we have a physical experience, I think nobody denies that we have a body, right? We think a lot about it. So it's a vehicle that allows us to manifest on Earth. But I think what people sometimes don't think about is the fact that this vehicle is related to the other vehicles, connected to the other vehicles. So your body can affect your energy can affect your body. Your emotions can affect your body can affect your emotions. And same with your thoughts, right? So, but people have a lot of experience with their body. They have less experience with the other vehicles directly. So the idea that you have an emotional body sounds maybe a little strange, or an energetic body. But the reason we talk about it is because there are experiences related to them. So why do we talk about an energy system or body? Because people have a feeling sometimes of sensations they feel that are not really physical sensations. Hard to describe them as physical sensations. So, for example, if someone exteriorizes or sends or radiates or emanates or emits energy towards you, then you might feel something, maybe a heat or a vibration or pulsation or a tingling. And then when you send energy, or maybe intentionally, or you're just thinking about someone, they might feel something, and then they might give you a call because they started thinking about you, even though if they're at a distance. So we have this energy body, which sounds like it's something meant as an extension of us that helps us to communicate in ways that are nonverbal, right? So, for example, someone giving a speech, we're listening to their words, but we're also looking at their body language, right? But unconsciously, we're picking up their energy too, right? So someone might come to you with the right clothing, the right attitude, the right words, the right body language, but there's something else that you're picking up on that tells you their intention, right? This person, I don't trust them. They're up to no good. I don't know why, but there's something you're picking up. It could be that you're reading the thoughts, feelings, and energy encoded in their energy, in their information field. So you could think of energy as a sort of informational field, data, right? That's just emanating from you. And that is very subtle. But there's also an aspect of energy that's more like a substance. Because if you accumulate your chi, right, between your palms, you can feel a sort of substance. So sometimes it feels like it's a substance, but it has an aspect also of connection or rapport. So when you have a really good friend that you get together, you feel each other's sentences, you feel this bond with them, this connection. It's so strong that they could go to another country and like they trip and fall and hurt themselves. You feel something bad and you call them. You say, hey, are you okay? And yeah, I tripped, I hurt myself a little bit. So you're so connected. So in that case, energy is a result of the affinity you have for each other. So I talk a little bit about that in one of the last chapters of the book, about like the nature of energy, how it can be seen in different ways. As information, as a sense of affinity or rapport, or as a substance, right, that you can almost measure, right? One of my colleagues, Wagner Allegretti, he's using functional magnetic resonance imaging, basically like a brain scan, to detect energy. But it's only one aspect of energy, the aspect that can be detected. The kind of research that they were doing at the Pear Laboratory in Princeton, where you have machines that behave randomly, but then when you put your intention on them, they can become more ordered. So for example, you have a machine that spits out zeros and ones. You can make more ones or more zeros come out, so it becomes less random. So there are some ways to pick up aspects of energy, but not the whole picture. Energy is a lot more than just like energy, actually. It's not the best word to describe it, even though that's what we use. We need a better word, for that. Work in progress. So beyond the energy body, we talk about the astral body or emotional body, because when we have an out-of-body experience, it's not that we're in the body or out of the body, but at least this is how we perceive things, right? We perceive like we're in the body right now, maybe somewhere behind the eyes or between the ears. Even though we're not really there, that's how we feel. Yeah, so when you have an out-of-body experience, the reason we talk about an astral body is because you can see your physical body is just sleeping, but yet you feel like you have another body. Now it's more subtle and it can go through walls and see in 360 degrees and things like that. But it does feel like you have a body. Now, I've actually had this experience where I'm having an out-of-body experience, beginning to have one. I'm kind of sitting up on the bed, and I've reached back and I've felt something that was back there, like pushing on me, what people call like the silver cord. And I realized it's not silver, it's not a cord, it's just this model to represent the idea that the physical body and the astral body are somehow connected. Well, most likely through energy, right? But at that moment, it felt like a cord, it felt like some kind of biological structure. But then when I go far away from the body, I actually don't feel like I have a cord at all. So a lot of my colleagues, really, other OBE authors and such, they don't even think it exists. So in a way, it doesn't, right? Because it's not literally a cord connecting these two bodies. But the bottom line is that there is something, some kind of field, some kind of system that allows information and energy to flow between these two bodies. Because the moment that it doesn't, right, what happens? Biological death, right? The body is no longer maintained. Its structure starts to dissipate. Now, you keep this astral body, but this physical body starts to go away. And the energy that was used to connect the two, most of it is dissipated also, or it should be, right? So that you can have a more real extra physical existence. Now, that's why when you go and meet someone outside the body, if they're in between lives, you can still have an interaction because they have that same astral body as you do. And I've actually felt someone else's like astral body on mine, and it felt solid. So I was in another context. This was actually at an IAC event. It was called the Advanced 2. It was in Key Largo in 2003. So I was starting to have an out-of-body experience, and then I felt that there were presences there, like these helpers, mentors, and I knew that the purpose of that class was not to have an out-of-body experience per se. It's more about feeling energy and donating energy and Basically, it's like a healing field almost, right? And experiencing the presence of these beings, being a little closer to them, right? To have almost like inspiration from them. But I said, okay, it doesn't hurt to ask. I said, okay, if it's not a bother, sort of, like, can you help me complete this out-of-body experience? Because I was just sort of at a 45-degree angle. I could see the chandeliers and everything. I'm like trying to complete the OBE. And I felt a hand on mine. And it was, for them, it was very easy. Just pull me up. And I saw one person and then another. And, they had sort of an appearance. They felt fairly young, almost like they're preparing to be reborn soon. And they had like medical type clothing because they were preparing to become doctors. And we had this whole dialogue, but it was all mental or telepathic. And it was all in an instant. And then I remember they took me to show me something, right? So it's possible to have this interaction with another astral body. If you're both using the astral body, you have almost like the same density. But if you try to reach a physical person, I won't say it's impossible, but it's very, very difficult. They might perceive you using their psychic abilities, like they might feel a presence, they might even see something through clairvoyance, but now you're trying to bridge a big divide, right, of dimensions. Now, this astral body can be very subtle in a way that it's not even resonating at anywhere near the earthly, more earthly plane, let's say. That you are really in a much more extra-physical or subtle kind of realm. To the point where this body doesn't even have much of a shape. I've had experiences with mentors that were presenting themselves just as like a ball of light, kind of. No particular shape. And it was interesting that they didn't care much about the physical form. Not just their own, but even like there weren't roads. What's the point of roads, right? Outside the body, if you can just fly somewhere or think of a place and be there, teleport yourself basically. They had some kind of temple-looking structure. It wasn't really a temple, but that's what it reminded me of, like a Roman temple, a Greek structure, like the Acropolis or something like that. But it was felt like it was on the side of a mountain or something. But this mountain was just nowhere. So it was not architecturally civil engineering sound, because there's no gravity, so who cares, right? Mm-hmm. And there were no walls, no doors. I guess they don't have privacy concerns. They don't care. And but they were just there. It was just like a space to receive us. It was me and a friend of mine, both at the same time having this experience. And there were, again, no words exchanged, just sort of like a sense that was transmitted to us. We were just starting out in this field, and it was more like an encouragement to keep exploring, to keep giving back. And it was a nice experience, but it was very brief. But it gave me this idea that, things are getting more and more subtle, more and more removed from the physical plane, until you get to this level, which I personally have not experienced, but I just read about, that people throughout history, like it seems, like Augustine, right, who wrote the autobiography, a famous autobiography, Saint Augustine, right, for Catholics, for Christians, that if you read chapter 12 of the Confessions, you will see a description of heaven. But it's not a cloud with a bearded guy, on a chair. Nobody's sitting there playing the violin or getting bored on the clouds. There's nothing like that. Actually, the way he describes heaven is very close to other descriptions of this causal dimension or cosmic consciousness. Very much it's all about a realm that has no form, it's beyond space and time, and it's more about ideas and understanding and a connection with the whole universe, which, for some people, that sense of connection with the universe, with all the universe, is as close as a concept of God as you can come up with, right? So, none of my experiences have ever indicated to me the existence of like a creator, but they have also not denied it. So I guess it's just one of those things I just don't know. But I do get a sense that there's more and more evolved beings, just like us, but farther ahead, and that we are all interconnected, right, as one. So this feeling of oneness is as close to a thing of a concept of divinity as I can have ever experienced. But I really don't think it's some sort of like we are creations of one being, right, or something like that. But it is an idea that can be motivational, right, for people to that they have a father figure that's looking at what they're doing and so on. But I think the father figure that's looking at what we're doing are basically the laws of the universe, right? No action goes unpunished, right? So good or bad. So our actions seem to be always going noticed by the universe, right? So, but I don't think it's a person that's like policing us. It's more like if I try to touch a hot coal, I'm going to get burnt. And nobody's trying to punish me, and it's not the coal's fault. It's just me learning that I shouldn't do that, right? That's not good. If I try to fly out of your balcony, it's not going to go well for me, right? And I don't need to learn that lesson. I've seen other people try, it didn't go well, right? So I can also learn about the laws of physics just by doing little experiments or watching someone else. The same thing happens with the laws of ethics of the universe, right? You can just observe and learn from others, learn from your experience. The problem with some of the laws of the consciousness is that they're not immediate, right? People get away with the worst things for some time, but maybe we don't see the result of that until like several lives later. So that's the problem, I think, is that it's difficult to get immediate feedback sometimes, except those instant karma, situations people talk about. It's hard to get a grasp of what are the laws of the universe. They're not written down anywhere. They're hard to grasp in their completeness until you become more and more evolved. So I think what I've learned also is that these experiences reveal to me more and more about the laws of the universe. And developing is just part of that is trying to understand those. And while we don't know everything, we can seek to be coherent with what we already know. So that's something that I learn about through IEC as well as through my own experiences. This idea of a cosmic level of ethics, right? We're learning through experience. Yeah.
What was like one new thing you learned on those planes that was something very surprising to you?
One thing was definitely strange. Was this idea that there might be extraphysical animals or creatures that don't exist on Earth. So I remember having an experience where I saw this thing that looked like an animal, but it was upright, but very fluffy, like a bear, but a little intimidating. It looked a little scary, but just the look, the feeling you got from it was actually very friendly, but it just looked intimidating at the same time. And I just remember kind of looking at it and thinking, I wonder if it will notice that I'm here, right? The second I directed my thought at it, it stopped and it turned around and it started coming towards me. And of course, even though there's nothing to fear, just out of conditioning, I got a little intimidated, scared, and then I just came back to the body. But it was just so interesting that it's something I've never seen before. I'm not even 100% sure what to make of it, right? But that's the idea I got. It was a sort of an animal form that might exist somewhere, just not here on Earth that we know of, but that it has a consciousness just like us. In a similar way, I've had experiences where it felt like the form wasn't human. It was an advanced intelligence, complex like us, but definitely not a human form. So then where do they live? I don't know, presumably a different planet, right? But the idea that we are being, sometimes visited upon, we think of spaceships, but if they're really that advanced, they might know that you don't really need a spaceship to observe, right? To be there, yes, but not to observe. So for all we know, people are having these interactions with other beings, but more like through this consciousness technology rather than a like physical technology. So I think I have had some of these experiences, and what it's taught me is that, again, if you can have an experience with someone possibly from another planet, and still feel a commonality because you're all consciousness, then what's racism? What's gender? What's sexual orientation or anything like that? Because you realize all those things are superficial differences or characteristics, but we are all consciousness, and that's what matters the most.
It's amazing. And I remember you just mentioned about silver cord.
Right.
In your book, there is also a reference of golden cord. Can you explain the difference between those two?
Right, and this, if the silver cord is debatable as a thing, then the golden cord is even more so, right? But it's just a theoretical construct to describe that if there is some kind of connection between the physical body and the astral body to allow for information and energy to transfer between the two, then there ought to be something that allows for the mental body to connect to the physical, to the astral body, right? And so since traditionally they've been calling the first one silver cord, they call this one golden cord. But here's the bottom line. None of these bodies or the connections between the bodies are the consciousness itself, right? So it's like we are this being beyond space and time, apparently, right? But somehow we're able to sit here and have this conversation. So how does that happen? Well, one model is that we are connected through this mental aspect construct, which in turn is connected to an emotional construct, which then through the energy body is connected to the physical construct, mainly through the brain, but the whole body. And so this integrated, Russian doll system, is working all at once right now. But once we go through death, okay, we lose one of the shells, but we have the remaining. And then when we are born, we reacquire one. We keep doing this, sort of like rebirth, living with a body, without a body, in between lives and in the physical life. But does that go on forever? No one knows for sure, but a lot of traditions and certainly the experiences that I've had indicate that if you extrapolate this forward, maybe many, many, many lives in the future, there's this idea, right, that these bodies are like basically scaffolding to construct a building. We need this scaffold of physical body, astral body, energy body, right? But eventually, once the building is finished, you don't keep the scaffolding, right? You get rid of it. So eventually, when our maturation process is sufficiently completed, at least with what we can learn with physical and astral experiences, then you will no longer need a physical body. Therefore, you don't need the energy, because the energy is mainly to connect with the physical body. That goes away. And if you've learned the lessons that there are to learn with the astral realm, you've also lose that. So you'd be left with just the minimal construct, right? This mental or causal body. And you would live, so to speak, as a free consciousness, right? So that is, a theory that eventually we will all exit this birth, rebirth cycle and be living more directly with the source of being, right? Having a more unmediated relationship with reality, basically, less filtered. Right now, it feels like, wouldn't it be nice to just have that now, to have an unmediated contact with reality? Maybe, but maybe we aren't having that because this is the best way for us to grow faster, right? Maybe we wouldn't even be able to grasp that kind of advanced reality. We have to grow our way into it. If we are here, it's because this is where we belong right now. We haven't evolved yet to the level where we can have that more direct and total contact with reality, right? So the same way that a dog is not quite as complex as us, but it's a valued being, right? And we love our pets and everything, but they still would have to grow and become more complex for us to talk about philosophy, for example, right? It's not the dog's fault, but we cannot have to discuss philosophy and ethics with the dog, even if we spoke its language, right? Whatever that is. So, but we could have an out-of-body experience with our dog, which is interesting, right? But the dog might not even notice the difference. It's not as self-aware as we are. That it has a body and now it's out of the body. It wouldn't even know. It's just, okay, I'm having a nice time with my human, right? My two-legged dog. I don't know how they think about us, but basically we are at a different level of complexity. So in the same way, a very evolved consciousness might look at us in a similar way. That, don't we love our little humans? They're still developing. One day they'll be able to experience the reality like we do. We're just not there yet. But the idea that we can grow and evolve is a positive one, right? And it takes a little bit of pressure from us that we don't have to be perfect, because we aren't. We have so much to learn. On the other hand, it's not a get out of jail free ticket that we can just get away with anything, right? Like we should try to be coherent with the best that we know of, right? And so that we can even feel good about ourselves. I feel like when we are not operating in the most ethical, most giving way possible, then we feel it, we know it. Maybe no one else knows it, but we do. And then even our energy doesn't flow right, and something inside of us is just not flowing well. However, when we're doing our best, doing what we feel most passionate about, and we are doing it in the most ethical, positive way possible, then we feel this flow state where there might be difficulties, but we feel like ideas flow, our effort flows, we don't get as tired, we feel a great sense of well-being and purpose. And it's hard to maintain that at all times, but we can stay there longer and more frequently. The more we tap into our energy, but also our ethical purpose at the same time.
Are there any dangers with out-of-body experiences?
I've had lots of out-of-body experiences and have never felt like I've been harmed by them, right? So I can say from my personal experience, not in a sort of mortal sense or like injury, right? Not really. Because I've seen people out of the body just like slightly, right? Relatives, friends. To me, the idea is that we are all going out of the body anyways. We might as well do it with more awareness and more control. We are even less vulnerable that way. So I think if OBE was dangerous, going to sleep would be dangerous, because we go outside the body, as far as I can tell. So it's perfectly safe. Now, I think there's just consequences that could be undesirable depending on how you handle it, right? So for example, this happened to me in university where, I was so excited about learning about out-of-body experience. It seemed so much more exciting and relevant to me than, going to learn about solid-state electronics or whatever, quantum physics. Just, I was like, okay, it's mildly interesting, but this is a lot more interesting. And so I kind of started not putting as much effort into, for example, my studies. And I struggled for a little bit, right? I went from being like an A student to just withdrawing from a class because I wasn't putting my effort into it. And of course, it didn't take long for me to realize that's not practical. Like I said, okay, I already put so much effort into this career. If I finish it, I can have a good profession. I can have a financial basis from which to then explore whatever I want. And that's what I did eventually. But for a moment, I struggled. I said, why don't I feel motivated to do the boring things in life? I just want to do this exciting thing, right? So it's almost like you can alienate yourself from everyday life because you feel it's boring and irrelevant, right? But of course, when you become more mature, you realize, no, they're both magnificent. This life is like a miracle that you're here, that you can have good relationships, that you can drink a cup of tea. Everything about life is a miracle. It's amazing, and you only appreciate it probably when you lose it, right? And so the question is not which life, which existence is better. We have both for a reason. So we didn't come here and be a baby and struggle to walk and then learn to walk and go to school so we can just have OBEs. We came from there. So what's the point of coming here just to have out-of-body experiences? It's the reason for life is not to have those types of experiences. Having those experiences can help us figure out why we came in the first place and to give us strength, ideas to perform better in life. So that's, I think, I've learned to balance the two where, I have a profession. I work with the electrical system, which provides basically the lifeblood of modern society, right? Keeps the lights on, right? So I'm contributing to society that way. I'm using what I know about innovation and consciousness to create cultural change within organizations so that the whole organization can perform better, so you can have positive work environment and so on, right? So I'm using all of that in everyday life, but then I'm also, developing other things like we mentioned, like new technologies to facilitate experiences, and but then also sharing my experiences like we're doing now or through teaching. So trying to have a balanced existence, right?
What do you think if we are able to, if someone is able to officially prove that this all is true and we have an scientific evidence for that, what impact do you think it will have on science and technology?
Two things. I have to mention one of my mentors, Brenda Dunn, right, and also Robert John, who were the co-founders of this laboratory, the PAIR laboratory in Princeton. So what they did is they performed these experiments. They developed a technology that showed essentially that consciousness can affect physical reality in a measurable, statistically replicable way. Right? It's an amazing historical contribution. And they got reactions from academic journals, like from the editors, right? So I wouldn't believe it even if it was true. I'll consider publishing it if you transmit the contents of your paper to my editorial or telepathically. Just really snarky, and very much dismissive, basically rejecting even the possibility that it's true. So, to be a scientist, you have to be open-minded, right? Like we were talking about for the interview. I think you're saying it was Tom Campbell's comment, right? That you have to be open-minded as well as skeptical. So skeptical so you don't fool yourself, but open-minded so you don't reject breakthroughs that go against your previous notions. But that's very hard to do as a human being, right? So first of all, I want to caution anyone, right, with this idea that, if we only have the perfect experiment that will show the world, that everything will change. I started out as a 16-year-old with that belief that if I just make an experiment, if I find a technique that people can have the experience, everything will change overnight. Today, I don't believe that is likely. But that doesn't mean I've given up, right? I do experiments, I support experiments, and I think it's critical to continue doing so. But I'm more reserved with my expectation that just because you do an experiment that has good data and it's very much convincing, that overnight things will change. So I believe that things will change. It just may take a very long time, possibly longer than we hope for. But when we get there, when we go past that tipping point, where there's a sufficient number of people that have had their own experiences, and the technology has gotten to the point where you can basically see some aspects of, for example, energy at least, on demand, and that becomes common knowledge. So for example, if I have a technology that I send energy and it does something, and then I stop and it goes away. I send energy and I see a reaction and then it goes away, right? I mean, that's something. Then I can use that to show people, look, energy is a real thing. You can try it too. And then people have this real facilitated experience, then they don't have to believe in it. They can just use it. And then when they see a result for their own life, they saw, okay, it was worth using. So once enough people believe, for example, that there is energy, then people might be a little more cautious with when they are angry at someone, for example, because they say, oh, I might be sending something towards them. I'm not just thinking about it in my head. People might become a little more cautious or responsible with their own thoughts and feelings. They can begin to. It will take a long time. But the other thing, though, is it's a stepping stone, right? So if once you accept that the brain is no longer the creator necessarily of, or rather, once you understand that your self doesn't end at the skin, that you have energy that goes out, you are a little bit closer to the point where you might understand that actually consciousness doesn't even come for science as a whole, and it is a stepping stone into studying beyond that, even into out-of-body experiences and the afterlife and so on. So it's almost like the first step that we have to take to open up even more possibilities, right? And then there's all sorts of technologies that might be we might be able to build on that. One is just like basically training technology, something that can objectively tell us if we're emitting energy or not, and it's less subjective that way. But we might be able to use energy as a way to, for example, find out people and subjects that we have great affinity for, because if energy is a measure of affinity, that we might be able to use it that way. And who knows, we might be able to tap into that energy as an actual source for powering things, right? So it could be helping us also recognize items. For example, what if in our next life, if we come back, we had access to a library of things that we kept for our next appearance. And then we could use some kind of energy technology to identify that we have high degree of rapport with a particular archive, and that was the most likely to have belonged to us. And then we can find notes and objects that we left purposely for us for the next life, so that we can pick up where we left off from more easily. You know, there's all kinds of possibilities that come up. But I think in a bigger sense, like we discussed before, if we see ourselves as a consciousness more, and one that is interconnected, that has an impact on the environment around us, then we are more likely to revisit our whole belief structure. You know, our values, behaviors, attitudes will change. And then instead of being more individualistic, we can become more ecological. So literally ecological in terms of having a better impact on the environment, right? A more sustainable existence, but also in terms of priorities. So if we believe that, or we accept, or we realize that we can live beyond this life, and we can have something beyond the physical body, and we identify less with the body and more with the whole, then we might be less selfish, right? We might be less interested in accumulating energy, accumulating money, but actually accumulating good experiences. I think we see a trend towards that, right? Especially after the financial crisis, when you couldn't accumulate more things, then you started valuing maybe experiences, maybe a good movie, maybe a good cup of coffee with a friend, right? Maybe traveling, right? As opposed to buying a new toy, right? So I think that's already encouraging, that people are valuing the subjective experience, a good experience, over just a good shiny toy, right? So that's already an indication that we're moving away from just accumulating things and just enjoying things, even if there's fewer things, enjoying them more.
Do you see any similarities between OBE, NDE, and other experiences like which are induced with DMT or even ET contact experiences? Are there any similarities between?
Yeah, if you look at the description of the experience, there's a lot of overlap. And maybe some are versions of the other, right? So, for example, one of the key features of a near-death experience tends to be an out-of-body experience. So either you could frame that as a near-death experience is a special type of out-of-body experience. So the out-of-body experience is a key feature of the NDE. So there's definitely overlap there. And I do find it interesting that, for example, accounts of abduction, right, many times involve being on a bed and levitating and going to a different environment. It makes you wonder if at least some of those experiences are, in fact, out-of-body experiences. It's possible. So there's definitely overlap. And a lot of times, it's hard to say where does one type of experience begin, the other one ends, what label should we attach to it. Or we have an experience and then we expect that everyone else's experience will be similar. And if it's not, then it's not that experience, or it's not as interesting or important. What I do find interesting is that a lot of people who've had near-death experiences, they become attached to it because it was a special and transformative experience. I mean, the thing that led to it was probably painful or unpleasant, right? Car crash or heart attack or something, electrocution. That part wasn't fun. But the experience that happened after, was profound. And they almost don't want to analyze it too much because they're afraid it's going to remove the magic from it. But for me, an out-of-body experience is like, I don't know, chocolate, potato chips, or something like that. Like, I like more the salty things. So if I have one potato chip and I like it, I'm not going to say, you know what, that was really special. I don't want to have another because it will ruin the experience of the first one. I said, no, I'd like to have another. Maybe shouldn't have too many right now. I'm going to save them for later, but I'm definitely going to have another later, right? Whereas if you make it too precious, then you almost don't want to seek to have another one because that one was so important to you. So I think that's an interesting perspective where people having OBEs that are volitional, or even if they were spontaneous, but then later they had intentional ones, they just want to have another and keep learning, right? Whereas some people have had NDEs, I would have expected that they would want to have more. But it's almost like it didn't occur to them that they could have more and that they were related. So, but I think people who do make the connection, then if they learn that they can revisit that realm, now it's not going to be the same experience necessarily going through a tunnel, seeing a being of light, and it might not be as dramatic. Like my first OB was I had a walk to my living room in my bedroom, right? And I was looking at the trees, but it was very profound actually, much simpler but very profound. And some of my experiences were more dramatic than others, more interesting, to narrate than others. But it's the accumulation of many experiences that really makes the impact. So I would hope that people that already have an inkling about things beyond the physical body, that they would seek to have their own experiences. Because just one, it's nice, but you could have so much more.
Some researchers say, though, that because you can induce some of experiences like this using a drug like ketamine, it's an experience that happens in your brain, and that's why it's not real.
Right.
What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, for example, going back to food, it's not because I'm hungry, is let's say you pick up a strawberry, right? And you eat it. Is the strawberry real? Even though you have brainwave activity?
Yes.
Okay, so saying that something produces brainwave activity or is corroborated with brainwave activity does not render the experience not real, right? Right now I'm having brainwave activity, and this experience is as real as it comes, right? Now, I think the idea is, well, if you're claiming that the experience is beyond the brain in some way, and you still have some kind of brainwave activity, does that mean the experience is just physical, right? Well, the thing is that even if we go beyond the brain, we're still attached to the body and attached to the brain. So we shouldn't expect the brain to just be empty and vegetative. And it has a lot of autonomous functions and everything. So I don't think that's really a valid argument, right? Either way, it doesn't prove or disprove the out-of-body experience. I think these experiences have neural correlates. Yeah, sure. But for example, when you have a dream and you look at brainwave activity, you're not looking at the dream. You're looking at aspects, certain measurements of electrical activity at the time that the person is having the dream. So when a person is having an out-of-body experience, they will also have a different kind of brainwave activity happening at that time. You're also not looking at the OBE. And it doesn't prove that the OBE is real or not, or that the dream is real or not. What makes a dream not real? It's not the fact that there is or there isn't brainwave activity. It's the fact that if I dreamt that I won the lottery and I'm really happy during the dream, when I wake up, I'm going to be disappointed because it didn't actually happen. It's a subjective internal thing, right? But if I said something very rude to someone, I'm going to be relieved. Oh, thank goodness I didn't actually say that to that person. I don't have to apologize now. But if you are in an out-of-body experience and you meet someone and you were rude to them, and if they remember, you might have to apologize. It was a real encounter. That's what makes it different. So if you have some kind of information that was transferred and you can prove that it was transferred, if you observed something and then you can prove that what you observed was real, that's what makes it real or not real, not the particulars of the neural correlates or whatnot, right? So, and then the secondary aspect, not as important, is, of course, the first question is it real or not? It's very important. But what I've found is that people have found the out-of-body experience interesting and worthwhile to pursue, whether or not they think it's real, because they can achieve some of the other things we discussed, right? Insight, creativity, less pain, reduction in stress and anxiety. So I think it's worth it for all those aspects, right? Health and creative and performance aspects. But if it can be a window into the afterlife, into the inner realms of consciousness, then that's the cherry on top, isn't it? But yes, I think whether it's real or not, it's a very important question. It can only be pursued by attempting to collect evidence that you can corroborate and that cannot be explained by any other means. And that's something that's difficult to capture in a camera, but can be done in a controlled environment. For example, IAC researchers have set up experiments like that, and others as well in the past, where you can set up a target where there are, for example, objects or random images that are selected by a computer from a database, and that room is completely sealed, right? Nobody can actually find out what it is. So the more random, and if the selection is random and there's nobody involved in the selection of either the objects or images, it's even better. So it can't even be transferred telepathically or anything like that. And then you are asked to go into this room and see the image, draw it, and so on. You do this enough times, and you start collecting evidence that people are able to make an accurate observation that's almost impossible to just guess, all right? So if you have a database with hundreds of images and you get the right image, you can calculate what are the odds that you pick the right one if you knew the whole database. But actually, most people don't even know the database. It could just be anything, a picture of anything. And they can get with photographic precision what the image was. Can they do it every time? No. But the fact that you get more hits that can be explained by pure chance, that should be enough. But again, how much funding is there for this kind of research? It's minimal because it's not valid in today's world. But if we did fund more of this type of research, we could easily, I think, come up with this evidence. But then the question would be, once you had this evidence, would it change the world? I fear it wouldn't, because people have to have their own experience. There's just no replacement. So while we should pursue this research, we should at the same time find ways to make it more accessible. Now, there's different technologies. For example, you might be able to beam a part of the brain with some kind of electromagnetic pulses that might do the trick, as long as they don't have to cut my skull open to make it happen, I'm willing to try it as long as it doesn't have long-lasting effects, right? And that's the problem with some of the drugs that you take is I just don't know if it has these long-term effects. So because I don't know, I've avoided it. I've never done any of that because I've found ways to do it that don't involve ingesting a substance. So I'm not judging someone who has. Just personally, I just have found that, well, some of them are illegal, first of all. Also, professionally, I cannot take any drug because of the work I do requires me to be lucid at all times. I'm not talking just the consciousness stuff, I'm talking about working with high voltage electricity and things like that. So it's not really an option for me anyways. But also it's just this concern about my brain. I don't want to do anything that might affect this very fragile connection, right, that we have. But also just because just with applying techniques with breathing, with concentration, so on, I've been able to achieve it anyways, right? But in the future, I'm open to the idea that there might be a way, biochemical, technological, that without long-term impacts might just trigger this aspect. But again, that wouldn't prove that it's not real. I mean, we are not arguing that the brain exists. We're not arguing that the brain acts as a transceiver between the larger consciousness, say, and the physical awareness. So therefore, if the brain is acting as a sort of transceiver, why shouldn't we be able to do something to the brain that brings on the OBE, right? So I don't think it's contradictory at all. And in fact, I think that's what will happen in the future. We will find ways to trigger the OBE more often. One of our colleagues is a neuroscientist in Mexico, Dr. Bernal. He presented at one of the events that IEC puts together periodically, the ICC, the International Congress on Consciousness. And he came up with a technique where he's monitoring brainwave activity, and at that moment the person reports having the OBE, he found a sort of a signature that's typical in brainwave activity. And he would then have the person be exposed to a smell that is unusual, that you don't get all the time. And later on, he exposed the person to the same smell, and it facilitated getting to that same neural state, which then facilitated having the out-of-body experience. It's a fascinating technique. So I hope we just can keep having more of these techniques, combine them, and then just have like super technique. What I found though is that there is no universal technique that works for everyone the same, because some people are more visual, some people are more susceptible to hypnosis or self-hypnosis than others. So we just have to learn a broad range of techniques, see what works for us, combine it into our own, give it our own twist, and then we go from there. That's why the IAC teaches this, like I think 16 different types of techniques. And so for me, breathing techniques work really well, but also just I learned to relax without falling asleep right away, and then just kind of allowing things to happen. And also the idea that learning about the best time to try the OB, when my body's ready to sleep but my mind can still be awake. I also use a kind of a trick that I incorporate into the app, the Numa app, where you basically set alarms that are consecutive so that you can kind of fall asleep, wake up, fall asleep, wake up, and just play with that hypnagogic period and get to the point where essentially you are deep, your body is deep asleep, your mind slightly awake, and then the out-of-body experience takes place on its own. So I think that's something I know anyone can try.
And my next question is a little bit off topic, but okay. I think it would be great to have your advice on when you start venturing on this journey with metaphysics. There are how to be aware, how to identify if it's a cult.
Right. Well, that's very important actually, because I've seen groups that started out with a scientific precept, but then over time they became maybe enamored with a certain personality, or they had such strong beliefs about what they developed as a let's say as a theory, that they stop questioning it, right? And then they feel threatened if someone comes with a different idea. And they say, oh, you're not just questioning the idea, you're questioning the person behind the idea. And that's not necessarily the case. And then when you are not free, essentially, to question anything, anyone, for whatever reason, right? You're not being rude, you're not being aggressive, you are just being curious. You are being skeptical, as you should be. Then you are no longer in a scientific arena. You're starting to slide into the arena of religion, or maybe even a cult. Now, a cult is when it's not just you get together and you celebrate your beliefs together, right? Now, if you want to leave, maybe there's consequences, right? Maybe now somebody's trying to control your life personally. Say, you don't really need to have this boyfriend or girlfriend. They're not really good for you. They don't, and they start to manipulate you, and they start to make it really difficult for you to be a free human being with your own thoughts, your own decisions, right? And that's when it's getting really tricky, right? When you feel like it's hard to get out, like you're part of something that's hard to get out. See, I've been volunteering, for example, with the IEC now for 20 years. Sometimes, some moments in my life, I'm very involved, 30 hours a week on top of my job. And other times, I have to scale it down quite a lot. And I teach one class here or there. But I've never felt like it's something that I cannot leave. I'm part of it because it's a valuable organization that's doing positive work in the world. But, people have come and gone. And nobody has gone and persecute them, or something like that. No. So basically, that's how I can tell, right? If an organization or a field has become too cultish, right? Is if someone is above questioning, for example, right? If something is above questioning. Now, people might have heated arguments or disagree. Right, that's just human nature, right? But the second that someone says, oh no, I'm infallible, I don't make mistakes, big question mark, or I already know everything, not good. Or, we have solved it all and there's no more to learn, no one can do it better, this is the truth, it is absolute. Those aren't scientific statements, right? So at the very least, the basis of all science should be this freedom of interrogating reality, of questioning reality. And when somebody questions your interpretation, you shouldn't feel personally attacked. They're just wondering about the merits of the idea, if there's another way to interpret it. They might bring new evidence that you have to consider. Now, even in science, this happens, where people get entrenched in particular paradigms and theories, and maybe only when they die do new people bring new ideas, right? I mean, that's just called human nature. But at least in science, it's encouraged, it's normal for there to be a sort of dialogue, and sometimes competition of ideas. And that's okay, that's normal. But sometimes in these other fields, which are harder to study because we deal with things that cannot be easily measured, it's very easy to go into la la land, and just basically now you're completely devoid of any kind of criterion of rigor. So, and then somebody can claim or actually have certain abilities, but that doesn't make them wiser. Just because you have more experiences doesn't mean that you are more ethical, wiser, more intelligent. Those are two different things. I can have lots of OBEs, but, not be the most ethical person or the most wise person. The two don't necessarily go hand in hand. But people get sort of like, oh, wow, this person has such amazing telepathy, then I should just trust everything they say. But they'll also think about it. If you're surrounded by people who all admire you, how long before you think that you are also infallible and amazing and incredible? And so I think there's a sort of symbiotic thing that can happen. So I would just say stay vigilant. If you start to see that, maybe step back. If you're in an environment that you cannot question things, you cannot disagree, you cannot have your own opinion, you're gonna have your own life. That's very dangerous, right? But I think that can happen in almost any kind of realm of society, but we're especially susceptible in this field, right? So we just have to keep exercising our good judgment, our discernment, respectfully, but definitely, you have to be your own person. Yeah, it's better to make your own mistakes and learn than to just get completely sucked in to someone else's agenda.
Those are very helpful pointers. Thank you.
No, you're welcome.
In your book, Nélson, you have mentioned about bioenergy, and if you could also explain practical applications of bioenergy.
Sure. So the reason Dr. Thurman and I wrote about these experiences, it's because, as the title implies, right, ordinary people can have extraordinary experiences. The kinds of experiences you can have with energy are very, very interesting, very practical. The thing about energy is that it gives you feedback about how you feel. How's your body? How are your emotions? How are your thoughts? And how is your environment? In other words, how is your environment? So that could be people, places, even objects. How are they impacting your inner state? So awareness is about awareness of many things. It could be your environment. So right now, you can hear the birds. You can hear the leaves rustling, right? We could also become aware of our shoes and gravity, and, all kinds of things, right? The air flowing through our nostrils and so on. But there's another thing to be aware of, your energy. You can feel the state of your energy. Is it agitated or is it calm? When you try to make it flow through your body, does it flow effortlessly or is it sluggish? And when you absorb energy from your environment, how does it make you feel? And are you feeling some kind of energetic sensation out of the blue? So these are questions that I ask all the time. And what that gives me is more information, more data. So for example, when I'm feeling well, I feel like I can move energy effortlessly. When things are not well inside of me, it can be sluggish. And then I have an option. I can just okay, what can I do? Or I can say, no, this is not good. I'm going to stop what I'm doing and I'm going to focus and work with my energy, improve my state, because I control my energy. I can't affect what happens outside in the world necessarily. I can try. I don't control it. I can just influence it, and only very little. But my energy, I ought to be able to control my energy. If I want to feel better, I should make myself feel better, if I can, right? At least somewhat. So we at IAC, I have actually learned techniques to sense my energy, to move it, to raise the vibration of my energy, so to speak, to unblock areas that are not flowing well, to energize it. And so one, it's just helped me have more well-being, feel better throughout the day. And one big thing is making sure that the environment doesn't affect me in a negative way. Now, it's very hard to go through life and not feel affected in a negative way. So of course I get affected. But at least I can become aware of when I'm affected. Then I can minimize the impact. And then once I'm okay, I might actually be able to improve what's outside of me, right? So it's a sort of like hygiene, self-defense, isolation from the negative energy around me. I once spoke to a lady who was doing customer service at a shop. I forget which store it was. And she looked really tired. But I felt like that this was a really pleasant person. So I asked, how do you feel when you first start in your morning shift? You know what? I'm happy to do customer service. It's really like a vocation for me. I want to help people have a good experience. But to be honest, right now, I'm just about ready to strangle somebody. Just because people come, they're rude, they deposit this negative energy at me, and then I just don't know how to handle that. And I thought that was really interesting that people dealing with the public a lot, they could really use these kinds of techniques to be able to not take on this negative energy. And then actually, by remaining better, they can provide better customer service. I've spoken to people who do therapy, who themselves later need therapy because they're dealing with people with problems and they're absorbing the energy of their clients, and then they need a vacation, they need time off, they feel sick, they feel ill. Whereas if they learn these techniques, they might be able to maintain their energy in a better state, and therefore they can help others even better and not basically eventually contaminate themselves or even cross-contaminate people, right? Almost like a nurse has to wash hands before, during, and after, interaction with one patient and moving on to another. We almost have to do that too. When we get kind of dirty from interacting with an environment, a person, we need to wash our energy before we keep going. Otherwise, we're acting as vector for energetic illnesses, right? Like anger is an energetic illness that somebody could be angry at us, and then we take it out on someone else. Or we have a stronger energy field that we do feel the impact, right? But then we absorb it better, and we process it, and we can remove it. And then we don't react the same way in retaliation. And sometimes this helps the other person see that they were unreasonable or that they were out of control because you were more calm and collected, right? And they might even come and apologize later. Whereas if you retaliated by being even more rude and sending even more energy, you might sort of feel powerful. Oh, I sent a lot of negative energy. But then you'll feel sick, they'll feel sick. It will not be a good thing. On the other hand, then you don't carry that with you and then dump on someone else, right? So I think you just end up having much better relationships because you're more tolerant to kind of negative energy around you. Therefore, you become a more pleasant person to be around. And the person that you spend the most time with is yourself, right? So it's easier for you to coexist with yourself too, right? It doesn't mean you're perfect, but at least you can start improving like how you manage negative energy all around you. From people being too stressed, angry, anxious. For example, it's something as simple as taking an exam. You go take an exam in a room full of people, they're all anxious. You become anxious. You start forgetting the material and you don't do well in the exam. Or I've actually done this, I've been in an exam packed with people, I can sense the tension, I start to work with energies, I install a vibrational state, I push the negativity out, and then I'm able to focus and do my work. The other thing was I've been able to access new ideas by entering these slight altered states. I didn't have to ingest any substance, but just by working with energies and achieving a sort of like almost like a partial out-of-body experience. And then I'm able to capture new ideas. Sometimes you work very hard and you're trying to solve a problem. The best thing to do, work hard, spend the time for sure. It doesn't come on its own. But then take a break and then meditate, work with out-of-body experience, work with energies, and then you'll get an idea. You'll get the solution, the download, So that's another thing that can really make a difference. At work, or even you might find a breakthrough solution for a social problem, for an issue you're dealing with, a relationship or something. So that can be really very, very practical, right? But another thing is just to get a sense for what kind of people you're working with, right? Let's say you're interviewing somebody for a job. That person is going to come into your company, or a new partner for your company, and their resume looks great. Your first impression is good in terms of what they're saying, but you might be able to pick up something energetically, intuitively that says, this is not going to be a good relationship. There's something intuitively that I'm going to have to do some more digging, some more research before I sign this contract or something like that. So that intuition is a non-rational way in which you're processing information and you're getting to the answer. But it's a little unsettling for rational people, right? As an engineer, it's a little difficult because I know something, but I don't know why I know it. It bothers me a little bit, and in the past I've rejected it because of that. But then I've learned through confirmation from someone else or from just the facts that arise that it was valid. And then, so now I play a dance between not just accepting and then jumping to something with no discernment, because I feel like that's something that could be misinterpreted or even manipulated. But if I have an intuitive sense, I consider it as data, valid data for my decision making. I also look at all the rational information, and then together I try to make a valid decision, the best decision I can. So bioenergy basically helps you with the decision making process and to sense things. Is someone really feeling well or not? Maybe you can pick up something in their energy and you might be able to help that person. And speaking of which, energy itself is a sort of principle that you can use to help people. So I've been able to donate energy to someone at a distance, and they don't even know about it, right? Just I knew that they needed help, and then I was able to donate that energy, and I even asked other people to do it, and then we're basically assisting that person, supporting them, and we don't have to advertise and tell them, and I helped you. You know, it's just something that you do anonymously to help that person, not expecting anything back, which also is teaching you to be a better person, right? When you can help without expecting a thank you or recognition, it's hard for us as human beings. We want to be recognized. We want to be appreciated. That's just our level of evolution. But we are learning to do something just because it's right, and we don't need a thank you. It's just a way for us to flow in tune with the universe. Not doing that for us just becomes not intelligent, right? Helping when you can, anonymously, it's intelligent actually. It helps you have a better life, helps you evolve, and you don't need necessarily to advertise it, right? Or like get a thank you from that person. So energy allows you to do that. But also you can help yourself. You have a headache, you can work with energies and try to improve that situation, right? You can prevent illnesses, I think, right? It's not 100% proven, but there's a lot of wisdom from ancient China, India, and everywhere else where people have worked with the energy system as basically a sort of diagnostic tool to detect issues, but also like a reflection of who you are. So the kinds of, like the way you look, the kinds of food that sit well with you, the ones that don't, your personality, everything is reflected in the energy. And if that energy is out of balance, like you have too much of certain energy elements, then you don't feel well, you don't perform well, and then there might be a way to sort of compensate for that, right? Either by changing your behavior, changing some aspect of your routine or your environment, right? So people have been using energy as a model to describe how balanced you are, like a sort of like art of living, right? So if you study like Ayurveda or Chinese traditional medicine, energy is a big component of that. So it's part of like a complementary medicine, right? For diagnostic and for treatment, both. And it's all about achieving some sort of balance of different energetic elements, right? They might use words like heat and, cold or earth and ether, but, those are just symbolic ways, fire, water, and so on. So I think there's a lot in energy that we can study that it has different elements, almost like an atom, right? It has electrons, protons, and neutrons, quarks, or whatever. So energy also has these different components, and we need to learn more about them and how to harmonize them. Basically, harmonizing energy is about harmonizing our behavior, thoughts, emotions, diet, sleep, everything. So you see how interconnected the body is to the energy. The more you learn about energy, you learn about things about your body. You learn things about your emotions, about your thoughts, and how they affect each other. And so basically, you realize that when you walk through the world, you're not just walking to a physical environment. You're walking through an energetic or informational environment. That information is affecting you, and you are affecting the information out there. So what is the kind of data flow, that's happening? How is it affecting you? How are you affecting others? So it brings you this awareness. It's very, very, very important. And ultimately, it's about that too. How are you manifesting in the world? So if you go to a meeting, and this is very practical, try to arrive earlier, right? And set the energy environment in a way that will make it more receptive to what you have to say. Now, it also calls attention to one thing. once you know more about energy, you have an ethical dilemma, right? Which is, it means energy is a way to influence. Are you performing a sort of like undue influence, or is it an ethical influence? So you have to be careful not to push your agenda too hard so that it becomes manipulation. Because people have been known to use their energy to manipulate people, whole crowds, whole countries. So you can be very good at energy and then use it like the dark force, right? And or you can be more like on the light side. So the force is strong with you, but then use it correctly.
I think it helps you be more responsible instead of letting things affect you and letting things happen to you.
Exactly.
You are taking.
You have more agency instead of victimization. That's huge. Yes.
Thank you so much, Nélson.
Thank you for having me.
I deeply thank you, Nélson, for joining us today. I think this was personally very insightful, and I loved how clearly you explained everything.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I will stay in touch with you with an IIC.
Wonderful. Looking forward to talking to you again soon.
And if people want to find out more about you, your websites are iicworld.org.
That's a good one for IAC. If you want to learn more about like the technology and design stuff I'm working on, you can look at numascape.com. And if you want to learn about the Princeton work that I was engaged with before, it's ICRL.org.
And thank you everyone for watching. If you like this content, please remember to like and subscribe. Bye.